protecting our kids as best as we can, and also understanding the role that they play in this really historical family.
William had prepared himself for an uncomfortable ruling. He had not prepared himself for this. Inside the fictional court scenario, a sealed estate decree connected to Queen Elizabeth is formally entered into the record, and its hidden history changes the atmosphere instantly. The prince reads the decisive passage twice, lowers the page, and says nothing. Because the revelation is not simply about inheritance, it suggests that Meghan possessed knowledge the palace believed had disappeared. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The words hit harder when William understands what has been uncovered. The court reveals that Meghan retained an undisclosed copy of Queen Elizabeth's restricted estate decree, an instruction governing personally owned royal possessions, family correspondence, archival material, and items tied to the late monarch's estate. The decree does not change the line of succession or constitutional power. It matters because it concerns the Queen's private wishes, the part of royal life belonging to the family rather than the crown. William enters a consultation room moments later, carrying none of the calm expected of him. His solicitor places the relevant page before him and points to Meghan's name. The prince reads it once, then again. His fingers tighten around the table before he slowly lets go. Catherine watches the change in him and understands this is not about objects. He tells her the family spent years arguing while another copy existed beyond their knowledge, and that thought cuts deeper than inheritance. Catherine does not rush to defend anyone. She asks what the court proved, forcing William to separate anger from fact. The record shows Meghan did not write the decree, alter it, or manufacture its contents. She possessed it, she kept it, and during earlier estate discussions, its existence remained undisclosed. That distinction creates a darker question. If she did not create the document, who placed it in her hands? And why was the palace left believing it had vanished? Charles receives the same findings separately and reacts with a silence that unsettles everyone around him. The king reads the passage, sets the paper down, then asks only, who gave it to her? The question shifts the crisis away from Meghan alone and towards someone with access to private royal files. William thinks he is preparing to confront one secret. Then another detail reaches him. Harry may have known pieces of the story long before the court spoke, though perhaps never the whole truth. William thought the ruling had exposed Meghan's secret. Within hours, he would discover that the more painful question concerned the people closest to him. The decree may have been written in formal language, but its consequences were painfully human. William saw a lost piece of his grandmother's wishes. Meghan saw something she believed had been entrusted to her. Harry found himself trapped between his wife and his brother. And Charles faced the possibility that a family fractured by mistrust had unknowingly been fighting around a secret that could have changed everything. William carried that fear into the early hours, when anger had nowhere left to hide. To him, the late Queen's private estate meant more than property. It represented memory, letters, and possessions meant to survive her death without becoming weapons. A private estate means belongings and assets owned personally by the monarch, separate from property held for the crown. Catherine listened as the prince admitted his instinct was fury. Then she asked the question he had avoided. Did he know why Meghan had the decree? Catherine's words stopped him, because outrage was easier than uncertainty. William could not understand how something so important had remained outside the family's knowledge. She reminded him that possession did not explain motive, and the future king knew she was right. Years of tension with Harry and Meghan had made suspicion almost automatic, especially after arguments over records and what belonged privately to family members rather than the royal institution. Harry felt that history crashed back into the present when a message arrived from William containing only a court reference number. He recognized it immediately. The number matched something Meghan had once called something from Granny's estate, a phrase he had barely questioned. His stomach tightened. He placed the phone face down, looked at his wife, and asked, "Tell me exactly when you first saw it." Meghan did not dodge the question. In a private conversation with Harry, She explained that the decree had reached her through an intermediary during their departure from royal duties. She said she believed it was private family material entrusted to her for safekeeping, not something she was expected to surrender. Harry listened, but the explanation created a wound instead of closing the old one. Harry asked the question that mattered most. If Meghan believed the decree was genuine, important, and worth protecting, why had William never been told another copy survived? She hesitated. That pause told him the answer reached further back than their marriage arguments or palace battles. The truth led to a private conversation years earlier, after a royal gathering, when a palace figure made a choice that would eventually reach the courtroom. To understand why that moment terrified them both, the story had to return to the night the decree first left palace control. Years before the courtroom revelation, the crisis began with something ordinary, a private conversation after a strained family gathering. No announcement followed. No alarm sounded inside the palace. A folder changed hands, a warning was whispered, and everyone walked away believing it would disappear into royal silence. Instead, that single fictional incident became the point of no return, the moment that eventually placed William, Harry, Meghan, and Charles on opposite sides of the same truth. Tension deepened after Queen Elizabeth's death, when estate administrators began separating crown property from possessions the monarch had owned personally. Crown property means assets held for the monarchy as an institution, while private property belongs to the individual sovereign. Several instructions were restricted while ownership questions were reviewed, and among them sat what became known as the Forbidden Estate Decree, a confidential direction covering certain belongings, family correspondence, and archival material. It carried no constitutional power, but it carried enormous weight. Meghan entered the decisive moment after a family reception at Windsor. A longtime palace archive advisor asked to speak with her away from the larger gathering and handed her a copied envelope containing the decree. The advisor lowered their voice and said, "You should know what was actually intended before this disappears into another file." Meghan hesitated. She asked whether Harry knew. The answer was no. Meghan held the envelope for several seconds before accepting it. She believed the material might protect her and Harry if arguments later erupted over family records, correspondence, or personal possessions. The advisor watched her leave, knowing the choice could not be reversed. No authorization had been entered into the archive register, the internal record used to track who receives restricted material, and no formal release existed. Harry encountered the secret months later, while Meghan was reorganizing private papers. He noticed the envelope and asked what it contained. She described it as material concerning correspondence and belongings, never explaining its full importance. He chose not to press her. Years later, that decision would haunt him because he would realize how close he had come to uncovering the truth. Unease finally reached the palace when officials noticed an archival copy could not be accounted for. They assumed it had been misfiled. No one imagined that a duplicate had already left Windsor. The advisor later departed royal service, making that unexplained exit critical once the court began asking who had access. William now learned exactly how the decree changed hands. His anger sharpened, but so did his need for certainty. Years of silence had carried that envelope from Windsor to a courtroom, and the prince decided the next answer would not come through lawyers. It would come face to face. William did not begin with Meghan. He began with Harry. That choice mattered. Behind a closed door, and away from cameras, advisors, and drafted statements, two brothers confronted a question far older than the decree itself. Could they still believe each other? William entered angry. Harry entered defensive. Within minutes, however, the argument became something neither expected, not a battle over property, but an accusation about trust. William had asked for the meeting before a palace response could harden into language. No lawyers, aides, spouses, or communications advisors would sit between them. A palace response meant the official statement issued on behalf of the royal household, and both brothers knew once those words were released, private doubt would become public position. The prince carried a court extract showing when Meghan acknowledged possessing the decree. Harry recognized the timeline immediately, and his face changed. William placed the page between them and asked, "Did you know?" Harry answered carefully. He knew Meghan had material connected to the Queen's estate, but he insisted he never knew it was the missing decree. The prince did not hide his disbelief. He accused his brother of protecting secrecy, of standing beside silence, because admitting uncertainty would mean confronting truths inside his marriage. Harry's restraint broke. He reminded William how often Sussex communications had been treated as suspicious before anyone asked for context. The younger brother said years of mistrust had taught him to expect accusation first and evidence second. William fired back that this was different. This was not a press argument or another dispute over briefings. It concerned their grandmother's final private wishes, and the future king could not accept that distinction being blurred. Harry then revealed, through his conversation with William, the detail that shifted everything. Meghan had told him the decree came from someone inside palace administration. The institution itself may have been where the secrecy began. William went quiet. For the first time, his anger moved from a single target toward the possibility that someone trusted inside the royal system had put the document into circulation. William demanded the advisor's name. Harry refused at first, saying he needed to speak with Meghan before naming someone whose motives he did not understand. The prince pushed his chair back and walked toward the door, convinced the meeting had failed. Harry spoke just before William reached the handle. He gave him the name. The prince stopped, turned, and the anger in his face gave way to disbelief. Charles had once trusted that person with some of the Queen's most sensitive private files. The confrontation that began as William versus Meghan had suddenly turned inward, toward the machinery of the palace itself. Power inside a monarchy is not always carried by the person wearing the crown. Sometimes it belongs to the individual, holding the key, managing the archive, deciding which folder reaches which desk. When Charles hears the former advisor's name, his reaction is immediate. The king removes his glasses, places them beside the court papers, and stares across the room. Because this was not a distant employee. This was someone once trusted to protect the Queen's private record. Charles understood why that trust mattered. The advisor had managed access to selected private estate archives and coordinated copies between household officials, estate administrators, and family representatives. Those archives were records connected to privately owned royal possessions rather than material automatically controlled by the crown. The monarch, therefore, could not simply claim every item because he was king. Estate rules, trustees, and Queen Elizabeth's personal instructions still determined what happened next. Charles felt the betrayal personally. He had defended the archive team during earlier disagreements, believing procedure protected both the family and the institution from exactly this kind of chaos. Now the possibility that someone inside palace authority had deliberately bypassed those safeguards left him facing an uncomfortable truth. William watched his father absorb it, and the prince's anger toward Meghan began to crack under the weight of something larger. William remained furious that she had kept the decree hidden, but he could no longer tell himself the palace had been only the victim. An internal access log showed the former advisor entering the restricted archive shortly before the Windsor reception. A second entry confirmed that a copy had been produced. The most disturbing detail was the empty recipient field. Someone had made sure the document existed outside the normal chain without recording who received it. Tension deepened when the former advisor provided a written explanation through a documented statement sent to the legal team. The account said the decree had been copied because they feared senior household officials would suppress an instruction that complicated control over certain private possessions. Charles read the statement slowly. William stood nearby, saying nothing, because the explanation did not clear Meghan. It did something more dangerous. It divided responsibility. Charles reached the final paragraph and laid the paper flat. "Then we failed before she ever received it," he said. William did not answer. His silence carried anger, disappointment, and the realization that blame could no longer travel in one direction. That admission changed everything, but it did not protect Meghan from what came next. The palace may have created the first breach. She still had to answer for why the decree remained hidden after it reached her hands. Harry reads Meghan's full statement once, then again. The second reading hurts more. She never denies keeping the decree. She never denies understanding that the palace did not know she possessed it. Instead, she explains why she stayed silent, and every sentence forces Harry into territory he has spent years avoiding. Because defending his wife from unfair suspicion is one thing. Discovering that she withheld something important from him is something else entirely. Harry studies the legal statement line by line. Meghan explains that she accepted the decree because she feared it would disappear from the official estate process. A legal statement is a formal written account submitted for use in a court matter, and hers makes one point clear. She believed keeping an independent copy protected the Queen's private wishes from being buried during future disputes. She insists she never altered, sold, leaked, or publicly used the document. Meghan knows that defense does not erase the harder issue. She kept possession secret, even after questions arose about the missing decree, and the silence now matters more than the paper itself. Harry asks why she never told him exactly what she had. She tells him the family conflict was already consuming him, and she feared the document would drag him into another battle with William and Charles. Harry does not raise his voice. That makes the moment worse. He tells Meghan that protecting him by deciding what he could handle still meant making the decision for him. She reaches across the table for his hand. He does not pull away, but he does not close his fingers around hers either. The distance between them is barely inches, yet suddenly it feels enormous. Meghan then reveals, through the same documented statement and their private conversation, that the former palace advisor had explicitly asked her not to identify the source until the estate dispute reached an independent legal forum. That forum meant a court or neutral legal process outside palace control. Harry listens, but another detail begins to trouble him. The advisor had left royal service long before the present crisis, and Meghan still had opportunities to disclose the decree afterward. Harry realizes her original explanation accounts for the beginning, not the whole timeline. For the first time, he understands that love cannot make an unanswered question disappear because answering it may hurt. The silence lasted longer than the danger she described. He tells Meghan he will speak to William again, but this time, he will not defend what he cannot explain. For years, Harry had believed loyalty meant choosing a side. Now he was about to discover that loyalty could also mean telling his brother something painful. The second meeting between William and Harry feels nothing like the first. There is no raised voice waiting behind the door, no folder slammed onto a table. Both men arrive exhausted. Between them lies everything that has divided them: Meghan, the palace, memory, resentment, and now their grandmother's decree. Yet the turning point comes when Harry says something William never expected to hear. She should have told us, and the palace should never have put it in her hands. Harry speaks first, because silence has already done enough damage. With no advisors present, the brothers separate two failures that had become tangled together. The palace advisor released the document without authorization, while Meghan later chose not to disclose that she had it. An unauthorized release means material was handed over outside the approved process, without the formal permission normally required. William listens carefully, because the distinction changes who carries responsibility and why. Harry admits that Meghan's silence wounded him. He says he cannot defend the fact that she kept the full truth from him, but he refuses to let that become proof that she created the crisis. William does not interrupt. Years of conflict had trained both brothers to react through old grievances, and they finally acknowledge how easily suspicion had become automatic whenever the other side's name appeared in a controversy. William then admits something harder. Seeing Meghan named in the court ruling made blame feel simple. History had already written the emotional script for him before he understood the evidence. The prince says their grandmother would have hated what secrecy had done to the family, because something meant to preserve her private wishes had instead deepened divisions she spent years trying to contain. Harry places a timeline before William, prepared by Meghan as part of her documented legal account. It tracks every known moment when the decree changed hands. One gap remains, but the sequence confirms something crucial. The palace breach happened before she became involved. The future king reads the dates slowly and realizes the sensational version of the story is incomplete. Meghan concealed the decree, but she did not steal it, create it, or engineer its disappearance. William moves the document away and looks directly at Harry. His brother does the same. Neither apologizes for everything. Neither pretends years of pain have vanished. But for the first time, both men stop trying to win. Harry says every side must admit its own failure before Charles approves any public statement. William agrees. The private battle has finally produced a shared truth, but outside those walls, the public is already turning the decree into something far more explosive. By morning, the nuance was gone. The legal distinctions, the palace breach, the advisor's role, and the brothers' private reckoning were reduced to one brutal image. Meghan's name beside the words, "Hidden Royal Decree." Newspapers raced ahead. Broadcasters opened with breaking banners. Crowds gathered near royal landmarks. Inside the palace, William watched a complicated family failure become a simple public accusation, and realized silence would now carry consequences of its own. William sat with Catherine as the coverage hardened into two competing stories. One version focused on Meghan keeping the decree. The other blamed the palace employee who released it improperly in the first place. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official headquarters and public-facing royal household, now faced a dangerous choice. Condemning Meghan alone would ignore its own failure, while defending her completely would contradict the court finding that she knowingly kept possession undisclosed. Catherine watched William grow quieter with every headline. She reminded him that public anger could not decide what the family believed in private. The prince agreed, though the words did little to calm him. When the same breaking banner appeared again, he reached for the remote and switched the television off. "Enough," he said. This time, he was not talking about the broadcast. He was talking about years of accusation becoming easier than truth. Meghan faced the same storm with Harry. A fictional morning edition carried the front-page banner, "The Decree They Never Saw," placing her name beside Windsor Castle and turning a complicated legal dispute into a single accusation. She finally told her husband, "I thought keeping it safe and keeping it secret were the same thing." Harry answered quietly that they were not. She did not argue, because the difference had become impossible to escape. Pressure grew outside Windsor as a crowd gathered, and television crews began describing the affair as a crisis of royal trust rather than a simple inheritance dispute. Charles responded by approving a palace statement that acknowledged both failures: the unauthorized internal release and Meghan's later decision not to disclose possession. The king refused wording that made either side the only villain. Knowing such a statement would be easier to sell, but harder to defend. William read the draft and asked Charles to delay its release until one final family meeting could happen. He wanted Harry and Meghan there, and he wanted the conversation free from advisors. Catherine supported the decision because another public statement without private honesty would solve nothing. The court had delivered its legal finding. Now William and his family had to decide whether the decree would become another weapon passed between them, or finally expose the cost of years spent mistaking secrecy for protection. In the end, there is no triumphant winner. Meghan cannot erase the choice to keep the decree hidden. The palace cannot erase the decision that placed it outside official control. Harry cannot undo the years when loyalty and secrecy became confused. William cannot pretend his anger was untouched by old wounds. And Charles cannot restore the certainty his mother once represented. Yet for the first time, every person in the room is confronting the same truth. William listens as the court position is laid out. The decree is accepted as authentic, its instructions enter the estate process, Meghan's possession is disclosed, and the missing copy dispute is closed. The estate process means the legal system used to manage a deceased person's property. Nothing changes the succession. What changes is how the family understands the secret. Charles accepts that the palace carries blame. Administrators introduce tighter controls over private estate material, while the former advisor is held responsible for releasing the copy without authorization. The king understands. The institution cannot demand honesty while hiding its own failure. That admission hurts, but it ends the temptation to defend the palace at any cost. Meghan finally accepts what Harry has been trying to tell her. Keeping the decree hidden damaged trust, even if she believed she was protecting evidence. She says she should have disclosed it years earlier. Harry does not excuse the decision, but he refuses to treat disagreement as abandonment. He chooses truth without turning it into punishment. William admits something equally difficult. His first assumption, that Meghan had orchestrated the disappearance, was wrong. The prince remains hurt by her silence, yet he refuses to accuse her of more than the evidence supports. Charles recognizes the deeper failure. Palace officials hid uncertainty. Meghan hid the document. Harry avoided harder questions. William allowed old resentment to shape his conclusion. The decree now matters less than what it revealed. A family built around discretion had allowed discretion to become concealment, turning every relationship into a contest over who possessed the truth. William closes the copy and slides it to the center of the table. Harry looks at it, then at his brother. Charles says nothing. Meghan does not defend herself again. No one celebrates, but nobody argues. William leaves devastated, but not destroyed. His anger has become clarity. Honoring his grandmother no longer means shielding every royal institution from embarrassment. It means confronting mistakes, even when the palace made them. The forbidden decree had been hidden, recovered, and understood. Its lasting judgment was not about inheritance. It was about the cost of secrecy. And when the doors finally closed, every person owned the part they played. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.